We're not fighting about a toll here. We're fighting about the philosophical principle of whether cars should dominate the streetscape in this city. That's the real fight. And I really think that this is the moment where that philosophical alignment and our sense of priorities is going to change in the city.
This is a special episode of The War on Cars. I'm Sarah Goodyear. As you may have heard, New York City has finally started its congestion pricing program. There are some significant exemptions and plenty of fine print, but the basic deal is that car drivers will now pay a $9 congestion fee to enter the central business district of Manhattan, south of 60th Street, during peak daytime traffic hours. They'll be charged $2.25 during overnight off-peak times. The money will go to the Metropolitan Transportation Authority for much-needed capital improvements to the subway, bus, and commuter rail systems. This has been a long time coming, since Mayor Mike Bloomberg floated the idea in 2007, to be exact. Even when the tolling cameras were all set to be turned on in June of 2024, Governor Kathy Hochul suddenly paused the program in a last-ditch political move that looked like it was pandering to suburban commuter districts in the hopes of saving the Democrats some congressional seats in the November election. But after the election was over, Hochul hit the go button again, and on January 5th, the tolling cameras finally turned on. Cities around the world, especially in North America, are watching carefully to see how this goes, and if it could work in other places. We're not completely out of the woods yet. Several lawsuits opposing the program are still dragging on, and Donald Trump has said he's ready to kill it when he takes office. We knew that the local mainstream press would be out in force interviewing drivers and elevating the voices of those against the toll. We knew that because the New York Press Corps has a long history of putting the 10% of people who commute by car in New York above the 90% who don't. So we went out on congestion pricing's first weekday morning and talked to some people who weren't driving. I stood at the corner of Christie Street near where the Manhattan Bridge bike lane lets out, and Doug took up a position on 2nd Avenue at 60th Street at the northeast edge of the congestion relief zone. Some of the people we talked with were random New Yorkers, but mostly we heard from advocates who knew we would be there and showed up in the freezing cold to talk about why they were so excited about the launch of this historic program. It was a good reminder that congestion pricing isn't just some abstract policy or political football. It's about making the lives of millions of people in the New York City area better. Here's what some of them told us.
You're on a city bike. Tell me what you think about congestion pricing.
I think it's great.
Why do you think it's great?
I mean, it's just civilized. I've been in this city for 17 years, and it got every year more congested. I bike and walk and take the subway as the last resort, but when I need a cab or an Uber, you get stuck in traffic. And it's just fair enough that a big city like New York has congestion pricing.
Have you noticed any difference today? It's just day one.
Not yet.
What are you hoping will happen?
Well, I hope to see a difference. Also for biking, because biking you go through cars that are stuck in traffic, and hopefully the traffic will be more fluid.
I'm Samir Lavingia. I live in Midtown Manhattan.
Okay, today is the first weekday commute of congestion pricing. What do you think?
It's really hard to tell. It's so early. I think it'll take some time for people to learn not to drive into Midtown Manhattan. You would think they would have learned from decades of doing it, but I think it'll take some time. But I definitely feel that it's been easier to cross the street than usual. I've been seeing less blocked crosswalks. I think there's less traffic. So, I'm excited about what's going to happen.
What in your mind are kind of the top 2 or 3 benefits of congestion pricing?
For me personally, the main benefits are going to be around the traffic reduction. It's going to mean that we're going to have better emergency response times, fewer ambulances stuck in traffic. It means that we're going to have fewer crosswalks blocked, and it'll just be easier to get around.
Sounds good. And what do you do? Tell our listeners what you do.
For work, I work at Open New York. It's a pro-housing organization trying to get more housing built in the city and in New York State. And then on the side, I'm also the Transportation Alternatives Manhattan Activist Committee co-chair. So I've been involved in this fight for a while. My first foray into congestion pricing in New York was in May of 2019, just a few months after I moved here. I was on a New York One town hall about congestion pricing. And one thing that I think has changed a lot in the recent few years is that this proposal was meant to raise funds for the MTA, which I think it will do. But over the last few years, I think the message has really shifted to not be a sole focus on the fundraising, but also on the impacts on congestion, which I think is huge. I lived in London and Singapore, two places that have congestion pricing, and my mom and I, when we wanted to go downtown, we had a car, and when we wanted to go there, we would honestly decide to take the bus because we didn't want to pay the 15-pound fee. So I think that'll happen here, and I think we'll see huge traffic reductions, and I think it'll be great for the city.
My name is Charlie Todd, and I'm a resident of the Congestion Relief Zone.
Very nice. Specifically, you don't have to give your address, but what neighborhood?
I live in Hell's Kitchen. I live just a few blocks south of the gantries, so just within the tolling district.
And full disclosure, former guest of the War on Cars.
That's right. Happy to be back, Doug.
Tell me what you think about this auspicious day, the first weekday commute of congestion pricing.
So, Doug, I'm so excited about today. I've been waiting for it for a long time. I counted down to the first car on early Sunday morning with a lot of other advocates. And today, I'm just taking a walk, observing traffic. Honestly, it seems like business as usual, which is fine. People are paying. Maybe when they get their Easy Pass bill in a month or two, they might reconsider their behavior. But right now, we just got a stream of $9 and $1.50 cabs and $20-something trucks that are just parading into the congestion relief zone. But I would say overall traffic is moving. Bike lane is certainly moving right here where we are. And I walked my kids to school this morning like I do every morning. And I felt like it was maybe about 13% quieter, maybe 13% less pollution, and 13% less traffic violence.
That's a very specific percentage number right there.
That's what I'm told it was. But my morning stroll after I dropped my kids off is I walked down 60th Street where the dividing line is, and I intercepted two different news crews. So I did an interview with ABC 7 and NBC 4. ABC was on Broadway, NBC was across the street from where we are now on 2nd Avenue. And I just saw them interviewing people in their cars and walked up and said, "Hey, do you want to talk to a pedestrian?" They're like, "Oh, yeah, wow, sure."
Wow, we don't have any pedestrians who watch our programs, right? Yeah.
Yeah. We didn't notice all the pedestrians on the sidewalk. We're just looking for the angry people in the cars. But they were quite nice, and I got a nice interview in, so maybe I'll be on the news. We'll see. But I'll say, Doug, one point I want to make today, the thing that's frustrated me so much in the last week is the rhetoric from New Jersey, and particularly the rhetoric from Josh Gottheimer, the representative in Congress from New Jersey. He's been talking a lot about the lungs of the children in New Jersey. What about our children getting asthma? What about the children in New Jersey and the pollution and their precious lungs? And my response to that is, what about my kids' lungs? I live here. Everybody from your state is trying to drive to where I live and pollute my neighborhood. I'm not trying to drive to your neighborhood. I haven't had a car in 25 years. 83% of us don't have a car. We're not driving to New Jersey. And when we do, the 2 times a year I have a rental car and I have to go through the state of New Jersey, not even trying to stay there, just going through, I pay a lot of tolls. So all you guys can pay $9 if you want to come to my neighborhood. Your kids' lungs are going to be okay because we're not going to your neighborhood.
And to call it out for what it is, which is bullshit, Josh Gottheimer and Phil Murphy and the congestion pricing opponents who do not live here never seemed to be all that concerned about children's lungs until drivers were going to be charged $9 to drive into Manhattan.
That's exactly right. Governor Murphy is widening highways and the entrance to the Holland Tunnel. I don't think he cares about the kids' lungs who live over on that side of the river by the highways that he's widening. And yeah, the whole environmental review. Like, we're trying to reduce car usage. Like, what more do you need to know? We're trying to get less fossil fuels spewed into the air. It's not complicated.
So I'm Chris Sanders. I've been living in Harlem for the last almost 15 years, and then I just moved to Midtown, Herald Square area, and it's basically the same, except, now my partner has a car, so occasionally we use that to drive out of town, but we both support congestion pricing because for me, it's about getting all of these fixes to the subway in Harlem and the Bronx and expanding it more, because those people are going to use it the most to come down and do jobs that are going to benefit everyone else, and they do not have the money to spend on a car when the rent is so high. Like, I don't know where people think that we're hurting poor people, they can't with the congestion pricing, because like the reality is that in Harlem and the Bronx, at least where I am from, like no one drives except for a few people, but they're usually making a lot more than the rest. And look, I want them to fix the subway. Some of the subways don't have elevators. Some of them are in serious need of repair. And then the 2nd Avenue subway would be amazing, because the traffic on 125th is spectacular. It's so spectacular. Yeah, you cannot, at this time you probably are, puttering along. We just need less cars we just need less of them. People, yes, leave your car at home if you can.
My name is Alex Duncan. I live in Astoria here in New York City.
And how did you get here today?
I got here by my e-bike, right across the Queensboro Bridge. And despite the snow, it was a nice, easy, peaceful commute.
Did you notice anything different here on the first weekday commute of congestion pricing?
I did. I was paying specific attention, looking at a lot of license plates, trying to see which cars I thought were what I call necessary vehicles and unnecessary vehicles. And just as a purely anecdotal, very unscientific observation, it seems like the ratio between necessary and unnecessary vehicles has shifted quite a bit. The unnecessary ones have dropped off considerably, and most of it seems to be now taxis, work delivery trucks, tradesmen, things like that. Those are necessary vehicles, of course.
And you were deeply involved in a lot of the protests this summer following Governor Hochul's pause of congestion pricing. You organized a number of rallies pretty much every weekend over the summer. I spoke at one of them. What motivated you to get so involved?
Well, what motivated me is that this is sort of a landmark issue. We're not arguing about a toll here, right? Like, New York, Manhattan is ringed by tolls already, and nobody's complaining about it. Nobody's fighting about the Midtown Tunnel toll, which is just a little south of where we are right now. I've never seen anyone fight about it. So we're not fighting about a toll here. We're fighting about the philosophical principle of whether cars should dominate the streetscape in this city. That's the real fight. And I really think that this is the moment where that philosophical alignment and our sense of priorities is going to change in the city. It's similar to the smoking ban in restaurants and stuff. When that passed, it wasn't necessarily immediate, but over time, looking back on it now, it was a radical change in not only how much people smoked in bars and restaurants, but how much they smoked everywhere, right? Like, you just do not see that many people smoking in New York. You still see some. You can do it if you want. It's a free country, You can still smoke a cigarette. It's just you see much less because we put the cultural idea in people's heads that it's kind of unacceptable and you're kind of an asshole.
And that if you want to do it, it's going to cost a little more than it was before because we raised taxes on it.
Exactly. People are motivated by cost and what they think others think of them for doing something. So you really want to hit both of those two metrics, which congestion pricing sort of does. I mean, we're sort of changing the narrative and saying, listen, you're causing all these obvious negative externalities with your car, so we do kind of think you're a bit of an asshole. But we're also going to make it a little more expensive for you. And hopefully over time, we'll look back on it and we'll see a lot less driving everywhere, not just in specific places.
What do you think a year from now? Do you think the conversation will change around congestion pricing? Right now, we're still in this sort of will it work? We think it's going to work as the advocates. We know from other cities that it has. What's going to happen? Yeah, you want to talk?
They need to stop it, bro.
Why do they need to stop it?
Because it's just too much money that the city is getting already.
Like in what form? You got your Easy Pass in your hand?
Oh yeah, I just used it.
Yeah.
I do the George Washington Bridge.
And why are you driving today?
To drop my friend at the airport.
Okay. And do you drive regularly?
Yes, I do, and I be trying to avoid this, but they need to figure out a way to add it to Google to avoid the tolls.
So just out of curiosity, how much was the plane cost?
Oh, I'm not sure. How much is your plane ticket?
Yeah?
Well, I won't hold you up. Thank you.
Higher than $9.
But they need to figure it out on Google.
Okay.
Google to avoid tolls.
Love it. Love it.
Yeah.
I love that because it's like, I don't know, you're paying to drive your friend to the airport, or you're not paying to drive your friend to the airport. He could be taking a taxi for $50 to $100, right? Yeah.
Exactly. No, he's saving money either way. And it's also, the airport's not that close to here, you know? Like, he's gonna use a lot of public infrastructure on the way there that we've spent all this money building so that he can drive his friend to the airport. I think most people would not find it arguable that you should actually have to pay a little to use public resources. Everybody else is paying, you know, the people on the bus, the people on the train, you know, everybody else is paying for the infrastructure, but drivers somehow have gotten this into their head that they don't have to pay for the roads that they use. You know, there's a basic flaw in the reasoning here.
All right, back to that question. Like, what's the conversation that we're going to be having a year from now? How will it change?
Well, it's interesting because I think the program is obviously going to be a success because the metrics are so easy, you know, just removing cars from the road is so easy because the road is completely clogged with cars. So there's nowhere that it can go other than down, you know, which, well, of course we are going to see. I think the real problem with the conversation, the real problem with messaging is that the money will go towards things that people don't really see. You know, it's very hard to see service improvements in the subway. Like, you just don't have a high enough perspective to know that, like, oh, that thing that would have broken if they hadn't done congestion pricing didn't break, and then I wasn't delayed on my train. You can't see things that don't happen, you know? So I hope at some point the conversation, or at least the conversation on the MTA side, changes towards prioritizing big, easy to understand ways that the money is spent. It's like, you know, like the 2nd Avenue subway extension is a great example, right? Like, people understand that. It's like, okay, there's a physical train line that this money is going towards. But just in a general sense, I think the conversation is going to always get more pro-congestion pricing as time goes on.
Yeah, I know about congestion pricing, and I know it started today, and it's not really going to affect me much because whenever I come into Manhattan, I use public transportation anyway. And even though I don't live in Manhattan, I understand why they have to do it. And in the long run, I probably think it's probably a good idea.
Great, thanks. And you live in Brooklyn or where?
No, I live upstate in Peekskill. When I come into Manhattan, I take Metro North.
Yeah. All right, well, and if you use any form of transit, this, you know, the money from the pricing is going to go into the MTA.
It's supposed to happen. It's supposed to happen. Let's hope it does, because they have to improve the subways, and public transportation is the way to go. It is. They're right. It's too crowded in Manhattan. It is. It's too crowded in all of the city, but I understand the outer boroughs, they need the cars to get around a little better. So I understand.
Can I ask your name?
Steve.
All right, Steve from Peekskill. Thanks very much.
You're welcome.
So, Rich Miller, live in downtown Brooklyn, and use a bicycle pretty much to get around almost all the time in New York City. Guess I'll just say on congestion pricing, I'm happy that it finally got started here. New York City is now the first city in the Western Hemisphere to have congestion pricing, which is a big deal, and hopefully others in the Western Hemisphere will follow us on this.
What do you think are going to be the personal benefits for you that you're going to experience as a cyclist, as a New Yorker, as somebody who presumably uses transit sometimes?
I'm certainly looking forward to see, especially as I'm getting on in years, using that extra congestion pricing money to expedite elevators and senior-friendly improvements at all our subway stations. And with our respect to our streets, I'm just hoping we will see them be a lot calmer.
So what would you say to the haters? What would you say to people who are just, angry about this, who think it's a money grab or whatever they think? What's your response?
In addition to giving it a chance, I would say join us in pushing the MTA to get these improvements done as quickly as possible that they say will come as a result of congestion pricing. I think it's something that everyone in the city would want. And actually, if you're looking for areas of mutual interest, do that with us.
My name is Noel Hidalgo. I'm a resident of Greenpoint for 20 years. And I moved to Greenpoint as a Volkswagen van owner and an owner of many, many motorcycles and Vespas. And the selling point actually was a friend of mine who said, hey, this neighborhood is really conveniently located to the BQE and the Queens Midtown Tunnel. So if you're ever looking to get into the city or get out of the city, you have really quick access. And it's perfectly designed actually for a car. Conveniently enough, it really is designed for an automotive user, like someone who's in a vehicle, not on a bike, not a pedestrian, not a public transit rider. And within the first year, there was one of the many casualties of McGinnis Boulevard. And I realized that could have been me, just crossing the street and could have been killed. And that was one of the first of several incidents, realizing that I'm living in a neighborhood that isn't necessarily designed for humans, but it's designed for vehicles. And that should change. And it was like, oh my God, yes, this is something that I want to dedicate my advocacy and my spare time and fighting for, is making sure that the streets in this beautiful city that we live in, which predates the car, which is very, very walkable, very cyclable, and it's designed with public transit in mind because that's what made this city great. I'm going to fight for that. And so I've spent the last 20 years of advocating for bike lanes and safe street infrastructure, joined the open data movement and found a small nonprofit, Beta NYC, which tries to get all the nerds involved in thinking through how do we change our city and how do we use data and advocate for it. And finally, we got that at the stroke of midnight on Sunday. So it's amazing.
Yeah, it really is incredible. I can't believe that we've gotten here. So you went out and celebrated as the clock struck 12 and everything changed.
Yeah, I was recruited by Kathy, which I will have to say.
Kathy Park Price,
yes,
of Transportation Alternatives, yeah. Brooklyn Advocate. Yeah.
She was looking for someone who was willing to drive in from Brooklyn and have their car decorated on one of the coldest nights. And I said, sure, we have a car. We've had to have and use this car for my son's medical appointments because we live still in somewhat of a transit desert. And the hospitals are located in transit deserts on the east side. And it is absolutely convenient because our city has been engineered around a car to use a car to get from Greenpoint to the medical centers on the east side. So I said, well, let's use this car for good. Let's celebrate the congestion pricing because what it's going to do is going to transform our streets.
What strikes me is that I've talked to 3 people today, and all of you are car owners, and all of you support this idea of congestion pricing. What do you think is in it for drivers?
So as someone who has spent the last 2.5 years, who has taken a young toddler and his caretaker and his parents around to countless medical appointments, it's literally the alleviation of congestion. One, it's going to make the roads more accessible for emergency services vehicles that cannot get through in this era of congestion. And 2, it's going to build an accessible subway system, which should have happened decades ago. It should have been implemented upon its first design, but we're hopefully going to get there. And I hope that my son, when he has kids, he doesn't have to have a car to get around the city because there's going to be public transportation investments that are made when he's a kid that'll pay off for when he's older.
I'm Seth Solomonow. I live in Prospect Heights, Brooklyn.
Okay, so you're not just some random bike commuter. You have a inside baseball take on congestion pricing.
I have a long history with it. I worked for the New York City Department of Transportation during the last go-around on congestion pricing. We weren't successful, but we sort of dug up a lot of the arguments that were used this time around, but also that were used for a lot of the bike wars over the years. But let me tell you, it's a real anticlimax, all these years later to come out and It's finally happening. There's an unreality about it. But kind of the most interesting thing is how normal everything is, and like how it's really hard to point out what's changed and what's different. And it reminds me of some of the biggest bike battles we had, like whether it was like Grand Street in Manhattan or Times Square. Kent Avenue was a really big thing. Like I remember being really worried on some of our biggest projects. Like, what if we change things? What if we do these things and it goes horribly wrong? And it's all this traffic, and it winds up being really backfiring. But then when it actually happens, you kind of go out and it's kind of boring. Like you go out and there's some traffic. Yeah, there's some people biking. People are going about their days, and it looks like it's hard to explain to somebody what's really, really changed. But I do think that this is different. I feel like this is really historic, and I think that we haven't fully appreciated the changes, and it might take some time to really kind of, to see the impact of it. And I'm not sure you can just go out in day one and say, I think over time, transportation isn't just about kind of like lanes on the street. It's not just about, traffic signals and timing them correctly or not, or turn lanes and that sort of thing. It's really about choices, and people really factor in their head, like, if parking is free, I will park my car for free. If the cost of a ticket is less than parking my car in a garage, I might just leave it out there indefinitely. If the bridge is free, I'll take that bridge and not the tunnel that has a toll on it, or the other bridge that has a toll on it. So once people start making these calculations, they start making different choices. And I feel like that's kind of the sort of the underappreciated part that's really hard to talk about congestion pricing, that it's a mental exercise. Like, it's an abstract exercise, but it's really real with people, and like there's money involved with people right now. And I really appreciate that the money thing it's serious for people. $9 a day for, 5 days a week times 4 weeks a month times, 12 months, it adds up. It's not nothing. And that's why I think that it's really kind of a long game. And I think that it's not just about the first day, that advocates, policy leaders, political leaders, they really need to be thinking about how to keep this going and showing benefits and talking about the benefits and helping people realize what has changed, because nobody likes to pay for something for today and for the next 2 years for the promise of some benefit further down the line. People really want to see a change today, but I think we need to really work on the storytelling and talk about how things are changing. I know the MTA has said that they're going to come forward with data and they're going to share how this is impacting travel times. But I think even it's not going to convince a lot of people. The changes might be so small that it's going to be indistinguishable for somebody in a car or not in a car. I mean, hopefully the trips are going to get faster for cars because there's going to be fewer cars. But that's kind of the promise of it, in a way that we're supposed to reduce congestion. So if there's less congestion, it's unclear with the $9 toll if that's going to be detectable, if people are actually going to see that benefit.
I think that's spot on in terms of what advocates have to do, because I think there's a tendency in Democratic circles is that you push for a good policy and maybe it succeeds, and then you walk away and just hope that everybody sees the benefits, and you don't continue that storytelling and that PR push. And the opponents never let up, so we have to really keep extolling the virtues, because they won't be perceptible for a lot of people for a long time.
Correct, and every day a lot of people are going to be paying that toll, so they're going to see it, and they're not seeing it yet, but they're going to be seeing it. And I think expectation that they're going to start saying, hey, what's going on here? Isn't somebody going to do something about this? The politics could change around this. And my biggest concern is, we've implemented congestion pricing today, but we haven't really said, well, if you ride the M15, here's how much more bus service you're going to get. If you ride the 123 train, here's how much more service you're going to get. We're building these new stations. We're adding, we haven't explained to transit commuters what they're getting in return for it. We haven't explained to pedestrians what the benefit is for them. We're not offering anything to them. So the people who are already for congestion pricing they're already sold, and they think that they've won. But this is, we really need to gird for a long fight, because this could become, there's going to be a snafu of some kind. There's going to be some type of hiccup or quirk. So I feel like, just like we were during the bike backlash, we need to be not just fighting back aggressively, and I think we need to do that, but I think we also need to be telling a really good story. And the MTA and the city and all the transportation partners, they need to come up with a strategy to sort of put real changes on the street, on people's commutes, like on people's sidewalks in people's neighborhoods, that really show how congestion pricing can be not just the thing, but a complement that makes other things possible.
My name is Kirby Kersels, and I live in the Lenox Hill neighborhood of the Upper East Side.
And you were a member of Families for Safe Streets, and you're out here today. Can you talk a little bit about Families for Safe Streets and why you're a member?
So Families for Safe Streets is a street safety organization that is dedicated to ending traffic violence, and it's made up of people who have either lost loved ones to traffic violence or have been injured themselves by traffic violence, or who, like myself, care for someone who has been injured by traffic violence. And we have both a support network for people who have been impacted, and then also we advocate for proven strategies to reduce traffic violence.
You can tell me whatever details you want, of course. You tell me about your family and how you were impacted.
Of course. So my partner, Emily Gossio, was run over by his truck while riding her bike to work, and she was in a coma for 6 weeks, and when she woke up, she was completely blind. This obviously has impacted her life and the life of those around her greatly, and it's why I'm here today fighting for a safer city for all.
How does congestion pricing factor into Families for Safe Streets work and safety in general?
I mean, it's really simple. The less cars you have on the street, the safer it is. In London, for example, after they started congestion pricing, traffic crashes fell by over a third, which is just, I mean, why wouldn't we want that here? We have an epidemic of traffic violence. Vision Zero has more or less stalled out. You know, we need to do something to change that, and congestion pricing is that.
You mentioned that Vision Zero has more or less stalled out. There's been some notable silence from the mayor and even the governor, whose policy this is, who is responsible for the policy. What do you think about the elected officials who are just kind of being quiet this week?
Of course, it's very, very disappointing, and it's also, I think, incredibly short-sighted. Everywhere that congestion pricing has been implemented, there is what I think is termed, I'm sure you're aware of, the valley of death, where public opinion is lowest right before it's implemented and then rapidly rises afterwards, as everyone, including people who drive, benefit from it with faster commutes and less time in their car. And to not seize that moment and to not be out here celebrating with the people who have spent so many, I mean, literally, some of us, not me, but some of us decades fighting for this is, I would say, almost political malpractice.
How was Families for Safe Streets involved in the congestion pricing fight?
So I myself was not very involved with Families for Safe Streets until congestion pricing was paused in June of last year. And that was really this, I don't know, dare I say, a radicalizing moment for me, because my partner, Emily, had been failed first by the government by allowing a street to exist where she could be run over by a truck. And then here was a policy that would make buses faster, and buses are the most accessible form of transit in this city. And it would also bring a ton of elevators to a largely inaccessible subway system. And here was then the governor, Kathy Hochul, you know, essentially say, no, we don't care about people like you. And that was the second failure that, you know, the city has altered her life forever, and then can't even try to make it better for her. And that was just, I mean, it's still enraging that, you know, no one really seemed to care that much. Or not no one, but that the people who had the power didn't care.
Let's look forward to a year from now. Do you have any predictions about where things will head?
I don't want to be too optimistic, but I think it's going to be a success. And I really, really, really hope that politicians both here in New York City as well as in New York State can seize the moment and deliver both long-term results, which will take time, which is the infrastructure upgrades that will be funded by congestion pricing, but also taking space back for the vast majority of us who don't have cars, who walk, who bike, who take the bus around, and making the city a more pleasant place for all.
I'm Paul Krikler. I live on Roosevelt Island.
So today is day one of weekday commutes for congestion pricing. What do you think? How's it going so far?
I feel great about it. We went around yesterday looking at a few places around 60th Street. Anecdotal, it looked like there were less cars. It looked great. The buses were zipping around quicker. They seemed to be more frequent. It looked great to me.
And you are a volunteer activist. You serve on your community board. So how have you been involved in the congestion pricing fight?
The fight's been won by so many people like me. We've all gone along to protest, to march, to lobby our elected officials, to go to meetings to speak. And here we are now. It worked.
So if you really think about it, congestion pricing is just a toll. And the only thing that's really different about it is that it's a toll for a geographic area, not a bridge or a tunnel. This is a thing that exists in London, Singapore, other cities, Milan. What does it say that we have to fight so hard for something that at its core is so basic?
I think it's the same thing we have to fight so hard for with other things that we fight for, which is that it's very, very hard to change the entrenched system, whatever it is. So we have a city now which is built for cars. It's very hard to change what's in existence already. People will cling on for dear life, and it's harder to get them to unpry their fingers from keeping on for that.
Okay, our listeners will notice your accent. Where are you from?
Originally from London. I lived in London till about 25 years ago, so I'm a New Yorker now as well.
So you have not been in London, or living in London, I should say, for the congestion fee there, but I'm sure you have experience with it. What's that like?
I think the simple thing I could say is that, like anything, when you have a big change, it takes 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, and then it becomes part of what the city lives with. So it'll become absorbed in no time at all. Come back in a year and a half, 2 years' time, this will be part of how the city works.
There you have it. Here's hoping Paul is right. That's it for this special episode of The War on Cars. Thanks to everyone who talked with us and everyone who is working to make the streets out there safer and quieter and calmer. I'm Sarah Goodyear, and on behalf of my co-host, Doug Gordon, this is The War on Cars.